Welcome to another episode of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Welcome back. We're so glad to see you. I am your host, Karen E. Osborne, author of Getting It Right, Tangled Lies, Reckonings, and my newest book coming out in September, True Grace. And I am pleased to introduce you to my guest today. His name is James Cox. Say hi, James.
How you doing, everybody? Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Karen.
So he is, just so you know, he's talking to us from Thailand, and it's the middle of the night. But look, he's awake. He's had his coffee, and he's
Got my
ready.
coffee.
So I want to tell you a little bit about him. He's the author. His latest book is called Roppongi. And one fellow author described it, I love this, a terrifying journey into the heart of darkness. And then I read a description of it on Goodreads, and it said, I love this one too. Fresh from his critically acclaimed psychological thriller, Silver or Lead, is James's previous book, James Cox brings us Roppongi, a ripped from the headlines page turner about all too real terrorist group that many may not have heard of, but after this read, you will never forget. So I got to tell you, this really intrigued me. I was really looking forward to this conversation.
Great.
Tell our audience, what is terrifying about your book?
Well, Roppongi, I think the main reason it's terrifying is it's based on truth. It's based on truth. The main character, the antagonist of the book, the villain, if you will, is a man by the name of Shoko Asahara, who actually lived. It was an actual. I mean, this book is a work of fiction, but it's based on real characters. And the idea, a lot of people call these, you get these various villains in history, and people call them monsters. And I think something becomes more terrifying to me when we realize that this person is actually a human being. And I think that's more terrifying. I think, as we've seen through history, there have been human beings who have done horrible things, and they are human beings. They're not monsters. And so Shoko Asahara was a quote unquote at one point normal person who had some issues. He was abused as a child, and he went on to do some horrific things, including an actual incident that happened in the Tokyo subway, where 9 people were killed by sarin gas, which is where this book kind of starts off.
Yeah. So that incident is what inspired you?
Yeah, I'm a veteran. I'm a retired U.S. Navy. I was in the Navy for 20 years, and I was actually at 3 ships, and 2 of the ships that I was on were based out of Yokosuka, Japan. And so, around 6 months of the year, I was in Japan. The other 6 months I was underway. So I spent a lot of time in and around Tokyo. Roppongi, the title Roppongi is an entertainment district in Tokyo, in the heart of Tokyo. Tokyo is kind of like LA, if for the people out there who've never been there. It's spread out. It isn't like New York City. You go to Manhattan, there's New York City, 5 boroughs. Tokyo is spread out like Los Angeles, and it's very similar, actually. And so Roppongi is an entertainment district. It's like 24/7 entertainment district, bars and things in Tokyo. And I basically, a lot of the main action takes place there. I thought it would be it's a very interesting place, very cosmopolitan. Just really quickly, one of the things it's noted for is when Mike Tyson infamously lost to Buster Douglas back in the 90s, a fight he was supposed to, win easily. He was cited in Roppongi the night before in the bars, getting drunk, smoking some funny cigarettes and things of that nature. And so that's a little background on that. Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
A little factoid there. So
Yes.
tell us about you mentioned the villain, but tell us a little bit about your protagonist. What are some of the protagonist's characteristics? What do you like about your protagonist?
Well, it's interesting. I know you've probably heard this, but maybe some of the listeners haven't. I am a I'm what's there's different types of writers, and I'm a pantser, what's called which is short for fly by the seat of your pants. And then you have a gardener, and of course the gardener is somebody who writes an outline before they write the book. They do all the background. They write the outline. They know their ending, and they go from there. I'm a pantser, which means I write characters. I have an idea of my story. For instance, this story was based on true events, and but I wrote characters, and I honestly, when I started this book, I did not know the ending, and this is the way it is in a lot. Well, this has been the way it is in both of my books, and so I wrote these characters, and one of the characters was Adam Welsh, who I thought initially was going to be the hero, the protagonist, and it turned out Keiko Watanabe, who's a female Japanese woman, um, she ended up being my protagonist without,
Mm.
and she ended up being the hero. She's a very strong woman. She had flaws. All my characters have flaws, but they overcome their flaws, which is what I believe real courage is, and real heroism is. And so Keiko, a flawed character that she was, starts off as a very weak character and ends up being the heroine of the story, and ends up being it is really the protagonist. Ends up really, I realized, wow, this is I know that may sound kind of weird to a lot of writers out there, but that's how I roll, as it were.
Yes, no,
Yeah,
it makes the book sound even more interesting to me because
thank
all
you.
of I write about strong, flawed women. That's what all of my
Right,
books have,
right.
strong, flawed women.
Yes,
Uh, and so I like the fact that she decided herself to be the hero because our
that's it.
characters do decide, don't they? They take
Absolutely
us
right.
where they want to go. I don't
Absolutely right.
understand how planners, I don't understand the people, the gardeners you call them, or the
Yeah,
planners that I've also
yeah,
heard them call. I think,
yeah,
how can you do that? Because you don't know
yeah.
where your character's going to take you, you know?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely right. It's fun. The only thing with that for me is, of course, when you're doing the outline, when you're doing the gardener or the planters, as you say, um, you you cut down on a lot of editing at the end. You're doing all your editing. You do actually a lot of your editing in the beginning, whereas with mine, it's on the back. It's on the back end, as it were, of
Yeah.
the book. So I do probably a little bit more editing at the end, which is fine though. I mean, it's just the way I write, what works for me. Everybody's different, you know.
Everybody is different. Exactly
Is
right.
great.
And every character, they all have
Yeah.
their different ways of approaching things. So you said that you were in the Navy
Yes.
and you spent quite a lot of time in Japan. Did you have
Yes.
to do a lot of an additional research besides having lived and experienced it as you were preparing for this book, or how did that work? How did the research part work?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. As you mentioned at the top, I've had two published novels. The first one was Silver or Lead, and this was the second one, both through Black Rose Writing. And Roppongi I actually began Roppongi over 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And one of the things with me, and I don't mind passing it on here, is that I am a recovering alcoholic, and I've been sober a little over 20 years right now.
Mm.
And getting sober has been a huge thing for me. I used to sit at the bar, and you'll see in my books too. I talk about alcoholism, and I bring that because you write what you know, and one of the things that made the change for me, I used to sit at bars and say, oh, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, all these people, they were drunks. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write. And I sat there for 35 years,
Mm.
figuratively speaking, and literally, and did not do anything. I just basically wasted away. And finally, I got sober, and I was able to. Finally, I got sober, and I was able to finally write. But it was over 20 years ago. And what I did is I got Silver Lead published, and I said, hey, well, I got a publisher now. Let's go back to and I shot out the premise. I shot out a synopsis for Roppongi. I had most of it written, but it needed a lot of editing because I was writing this when I was drinking. I mean,
Mm.
when I was and I'm a different, I had workshopped through a wonderful through a wonderful writer over at UCLA workshop, and then back named Susan Chihak. I'm probably mispronouncing her name, but she's written several books. You can look her up. She's a wonderful writer and a wonderful mentor. And she gave me hope, back in the night, it was 99, I think, when I was writing this, right after. So to answer your question, was the research part, I had been in Japan for 6 years, so it was fresh in my mind. A lot of the inside baseball, inside story stuff about Japan was fresh in my mind. So I had that there. What I did research is I used some Japanese phrases there, and I wanted to make sure I got them right, because I do not speak Japanese by any means fluently. I just have a few words here and there, and I can ask for directions and things of that nature. Most people in Japan, they learn like 6 years of English grammar in school. So I actually taught conversational English in Japan without having to know Japanese. So there was some research, but a lot of it is inside stuff that I knew. I was there when the attack actually happened. I didn't witness the attack, but it happened on the same line, the subway line, line I used to travel on when I visited my then girlfriend, who is slightly modeled on Keiko Watanabe.
Hi, I have a quick question for you. Do you like murder mysteries? I have one that's a page turner. Tangled Lives. 2 women, one older, one younger, get together to solve a mystery. I hope you'll give it a try.
I hope that is the question. Yeah.
That did. No, and it's so interesting.
Thank you.
How did you end up in Thailand?
Oh, wow. That's another book, but I'm actually starting my 3rd book here. But just quickly, I know we don't have enough time to explain this completely, but I am right when the pandemic happened. I was was with my wife for 2 years dating, and then 13 years married. She's a cancer survivor. She got breast cancer, right when we got married, and we went through that for about 5 years. Then now I'm happy to say she's a survivor and she's doing great. We're still very good friends, but my marriage ended right about the pandemic, and it was basically the cliche. It's almost a cliche. We started going in different directions. That's what happened. So that happened. My mom died, who I was really close with my mother. She lived to the ripe old age of 90, and we were lucky we had a big do for her on her 90th birthday in New York City. It was great. Had all the relatives. And then people laugh sometimes when I say this, but I know some people can relate. My cat Claudius died very suddenly, and that guy was like our son. We didn't have any kids together, but that guy, he walked into the room one night, and which he would do every once in a while, and we thought he had a hairball, but turned out it was a stroke. And this was during the pandemic. And it was, I have his ashes. I still have his ashes in my bedroom here in Thailand. I brought his ashes here. But to answer your questions, I was in depression. I was really in a depression. And I just said, I'd been to Thailand briefly, but it was when I was drinking. I was a different person. And I said, let's come over here. I mean, the cost of living is much lower. I had lived in Los Angeles, and I just, the cost of living was much lower. I said, let's get out. Let's, do some kind of spiritual quest here. And I've been here for about a little over 10 months.
And you're writing.
And I'm starting on the 3rd book, which is totally different than my first 2 books. It's not a thriller. It's, I think I like it. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
Cool. That is cool. Does it take place in Thailand?
Yeah, parts of it will take place. It has to do with some elephants, very spiritual beings. I love elephants. And the great thing about Thailand is they have places here where they rehabilitate elephants who have been injured in landmines up in Laos, and or have been abused in the forest and the logging things. And it's wonderful. Yeah. So
yeah. So as you think back on your very colorful life, sir, if I might say,
thank you.
Can you think of a book that had just a tremendous impact on you, either as a person or as a writer, or,
Yeah.
personally?
There's been a few, and I'm looking at both of them right now in my bookshelf, and which I should have behind me, but I don't, unfortunately. But it's Don Quixote
Mm,
and To Kill a Mockingbird.
mm,
Um, Don Quixote is just, I cry when I read Don Quixote. Continue to reread it. It's just a beautiful, I think it's the greatest novel ever written, in my
mm,
opinion. And I know it was one of the first that was ever written. But To Kill a Mockingbird, I actually went on a road trip before I decided to come to Thailand. I went to Monroeville, Alabama, which you may or may not know is the birthplace of Harper Lee, the wonderful writer of To Kill a Mockingbird, and Truman Capote. They were actually best friends. Of
mm,
course, Truman was the model. A Scout was Harper, and Truman was the kid who didn't have any parents and was always bragging. That was based on him. So I've always was I just loved the book so much. I was so interested in her. I wanted to go there while she was still alive, but she had passed away. And so I visited Monroeville, and that's how intense my feeling is for that book. I love the book. I love the movie. It's one of the few things where they do such a wonderful job on the movie, and I think it has such a lot to say. This the scene in the book, and they do it in the movie also, where Atticus, the father, is at the courtroom, and the kids are up in the balcony with the African American people who were only allowed to be up there, and the minister says, "Stand up." I'm paraphrasing. "Stand up,
mm,
children. Your father's walking," and it almost brings tears to my eyes when I do.
mm.
It's such a beautiful book. I love the book. It's timeless, and
It is timeless.
the writing is amazing. And I reread it 2 or 3 times. Those are two of my main ones. As far as from the thriller aspect, I'm a big John Grisham, Michael Connelly,
Mm.
uh, Mary Higgins Clark, of all people. I read. I love her, um, and a few others. Yeah, yeah.
That's excellent. And
Yeah.
so now that we've got everybody intrigued about you, everybody's
Yeah.
interested, and how can they stay in touch with you? How can they follow you? Do you have a online presence that they can
Yes.
connect?
Anybody's a writer out there, and you know this. You need to have an online presence, whether you like it or not. Whether you like so, I'm on Facebook as James Cox, COX. Also have a page, James Cox Author, on Facebook. And I also, please, I'm sorry, have a page called James Cox Renaissance Man on Facebook. My website is www.thejamescoxauthor.com. That's my website. I'm also on Twitter, and I'm also on Instagram. I just followed you the other day on Instagram. And I don't know why I hadn't earlier, but I thought I had. But James Cox Writer, I'm sorry, on Instagram. But so I think, and I mentioned my website
Yeah, I found you on Goodreads, but
and
there are quite
Goodreads.
a few other James Cox. That's why I like the
Yeah,
James Cox. That's
yeah.
smart. Like not all the
Goodreads
other,
and BookBub, BookBub.
and a BookBub. Okay.
BookBub. I'm on that, and yeah, and if you go on, if they go online on any of my sites, but particularly my website, there's a way where you can contact me there directly via email and stuff, and I will respond, and I'll answer any questions anybody has. Yeah.
Excellent. So I hope all of you will follow James, that you will follow his books, that you'll buy his book. That we really care about. And the second thing we care about so much is that you will review his book, because reviews make such a difference for us. And
Yes.
we thank you so much. I thank you, James, for being here, and I thank all of you for being with us. And I hope that I will see you next week on What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Take care, everybody. Have a great week.